Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Dutch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And today we have a very special guest who we are extremely excited to talk to. It is Tyler Snure, who is a teen and young adult fantasy author, but most remarkably, his first book he wrote and published at the age of just 17. So Tyler, we are delighted to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm sorry for my cat's tail disappearing in and out of the video feed. Of course, we wouldn't be here either without the man himself, Craig Dutch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thank you, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Tyler. You published your first book at 17, and contemporary fantasy, right? And that is something to talk about for sure, and we can briefly go over that. But really, the reason why you're here is that we are talking about something that Roland and I have mentioned, I guess, a number of times in the last 100 episodes or so that we've recorded here, but we've never really spent a lot of time, like a whole episode about it. It's the idea that it's about how critical that first hook is in your book, the first chapter, the first page, all the stuff that people can see when they look inside, or if they're picking the book up in the bookstore and just flipping through and reading the first bit. That is such a critical hook, and a lot of authors don't pay enough attention to that. They feel like, well, people will get into it, I got to build all these things and the scenes and everything, and then the adventure starts later, and they don't mind if it, they think it's fine if the first part isn't sort of grabbing the reader, right? And that might be true if you already have a really big audience that follows you after you've written many books. Maybe they'll always give you that chance, but especially if you're new, or if you're somebody who is still building your audience, I think it's so super critical to have something that is really, really going to grab the reader. And this is a topic that I know that you talk about a lot, and so it's great that we're going to be able to pick your brain on that. So first of all, let's hear a little bit about yourself and how you got started at such a young age, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So I'm Tyler Snure. I'm a young adult and teen fantasy author. My first book, The Jewels of Fate, came out when I was 17. I published it when I was 17, and it actually was a 5-year project. So it started, way in my early teens, and then finally was released, just as I was on my way out of high school. And The Sword of Surenth is the second book in the series. So it is a trilogy, 2 books so far. I'm currently working on my third. And The Sword of Surenth launched last August.
That's awesome. Amazing. So you started the book when you were 13?
Yes, roughly.
Roughly. Good. I hope roughly, because my maths isn't that good. I was like 12, 13. But
yeah, I mean, that's pretty incredible. I think I was writing at that age, but not novels, like little short stories and things that I probably never finished. But it's awesome that you were able to stick with it and take it all the way through, even if it took a bunch of years. I mean, lots of people take years to write a book, and they didn't start at 13.
Absolutely. There are some authors who didn't even get published until their 70s, 80s.
Yeah. And hopefully it didn't take them all those years to write it. But so what sort of motivated you to sort of want to get writing at that age?
Definitely my love of reading. That was one of the huge factors. So I've been a reader as long as I can remember. I have 2 massive bookshelves in my room that are just overflowing. There's no space for them. I love same genre. Like, I grew up with series like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson and The Hunger Games and Divergent and all those big teen, young adult kind of sci-fi fantasy. That's what I grew up with, and I still love all those stories today. And eventually it got to the point where I was kind of thinking to myself, I want to try writing one of these stories, and kind of telling this tale.
Absolutely. That's the kind of stuff I was reading too, where, I mean, I guess that stuff came out later for me. I was reading, more pure fantasy stuff back at your age. But later in life, I read all that stuff. Even right now, I'm reading, the prequel to the Hunger Games because I know the movie just came out, and I'm trying to catch up. I like to read the book first, But okay, so what sort of got you to the idea of how critical this first stuff is, and tell us about it. You told me that you run like a masterclass or something on this topic, right? So how did that?
Before we go in, we should maybe talk about the first line of the Jewels of Fate, which is, "I nearly witnessed the end of the world," which is a cracker. I mean, like, did you start off when you were writing this with that line, or did that line come in later?
It came in way later. So the reason I'm so passionate about talking about the start of the story is because in the Jewels of Fate, I think I rewrote it about 5 different times. So that first line, "I nearly witnessed the end of the world," I think that got added in one of the final drafts before it went into print. So it was definitely reworking it over and over and over again.
Now carry on with Craig's question. I just wanted to put that line in because it was a cracker.
Well, I think that's like a critical thing for people to understand, right? You don't have to be like, come up with that first line before you even start writing. That can come in the editing phase and the 5th version of the editing phase, and it often has to, right? Because you haven't written the book yet, but then you realize like something that you can put in to foreshadow or whatever, right? Different books are going to have different hooks, but that is a really, really good way to do it. To come back later and be like, okay, now that I've written the story, I know exactly how everything goes. I can come back to the beginning and really spruce that up.
Absolutely.
So what made you realize how important that was, and then take you into that sort of where you're actually teaching a masterclass on this topic?
Well, partly just how long it took me to write my first book, and reworking those first few chapters over and over and over again really showed me the importance of getting it right. And I knew I didn't want to publish until I was confident in the whole book as a whole, but especially the beginning, so that I can hook in those readers and keep them there throughout the whole book. And also thinking of when I'm reading, what is my reaction to the beginning, the middle, the end of certain books? Like why do I, stick with an author who I might have never read before? Or why do I stop reading a certain author, after 6 books, but then the 7th one, just didn't sit well with me? Like why? What is that feeling like? What is that process like for me as a reader?
That's a really good way of looking at it, because I mean, to be successful in self-publishing, you can't just have one book. You have to have multiple books, and you want to hook someone in with one book, but you want them to keep reading all your books. And you're right, if you have a dud, then it can just kill off all of those follow-throughs.
Right. So okay, so what do you suggest to people to sort of figure this out?
So when talking about the start of your novel, I address something called the reader's roadmap. And this is kind of like putting yourself in the shoes of the reader. So I've discovered that when you decide that you're going to buy a new book, and this is assuming that you don't know what book you're going to get, there are 8 steps between you making that decision and you purchasing that book. And if any of those 8 steps are a dud, then you are way more likely to not end up purchasing the book. And obviously that's not what an author wants. So the first step is the store. So whether you shop online or you shop at a brick and mortar store, you generally have a store that you go to purchase books. And then the next section is the genre. Like for me, I usually don't buy romance books. In fact, I don't think I've ever bought, romance books, because it's not the genre I like to read. So immediately I know if I want to buy a book, it's probably going to be in the sci-fi fantasy category. And then the next step is the cover. So now you're in that section of the store or on Amazon. What does the cover look like? How is it attracting your eye? And then if you like the cover, then you flip the book over and you read the synopsis. So that's the 4th step. And if you like the synopsis, then you might open the book and read the first line. That's step 5. And then step 6 is the first page. Step 7 is the first chapter. And then step 8 is finally making that decision to buy the book or not.
I have to admit, for a young author with your first book, that shows an awful lot of, that's a really astute way of looking at it. I mean, most of us, I wrote 11 books before I had my first bestseller, before I first really started thinking about like, oh, well, what's going to make people buy these books? Before then, I'd just been writing the book. It seems like a really intelligent and smart approach to that. What inspired that? When did you start thinking about being a writer in such in terms of like the commercialization of it?
Well, after I published my first book, I really started doing research into marketing and the realization that like if I don't kind of, tell people about it and work on getting the book out there, it's not going to get read. So then I started thinking about, well, what do other people look for in books, and how can I tweak my own novel to, meet their expectations and, get them excited about reading my book. And that's when I realized this kind of 8-step process from, the decision to buy a new book to here's my money at the cashier, take the book home and read it.
But you had written that you didn't go back and change the first line after you published that book, though,
No,
right?
no.
Okay, so you had done that.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you find your sales were?
Sales were a lot better when the second book came out, just because when I did my second, well, actually COVID had a lot to do with it because COVID kind of canceled my first book launch back in 2020. So really, when I did my first real book launch, which was for The Sword of Sorenth, then more people were like, oh, I really want to read the second book, but since it's a series, I should go back and read The Jewels of Fate first and then read The Sword of Sorenth. So it, naturally boosted my sales in comparison to the first book. But then it's like the first book kind of took off a little bit, where I was selling probably about 3 times more the first book than the second book.
That's really interesting. That kind of mirrors my, I think not just my experience, a lot of authors' experience. Like they publish the first book, it doesn't have the impact that they want. They publish a second, third. For me, it was the second book in the series. And then from whatever point on I published a new book in that series, I would sell a lot of copies of that book, but also an equal number of the first book in the series because people wanted to start from the beginning.
So are there different ways that that you can sort of make that first line or first paragraph or first chapter really, really engaging? What you've done is sort of like a foreshadowing. So I guess that's one way to do it, right? And I know from some of my books, one of the things that I did was, if I couldn't start the story off in a sort of like in a way that was going to hook people, or if it didn't naturally start there, then I would, do some kind of like flashbacky thing, where it was like, it starts off with this thing that happened before, and then just because that's more exciting, and then it jumps forward, a little bit, right? So that's sort of maybe another technique. But let's see, there must be some other ones that you know of that, because not everything is going to work for every author, for every book type, or genre. So there, we probably want to go through some ideas that authors can use.
So I do also use flashbacks, but not necessarily in the beginning of the novel. In the Jewels of Fate, their flashbacks start probably around the midpoint of the book, for various reasons related to the plot. But in the beginning, the technique that I use is something called the pre-problem. So the pre-problem is an issue that's still relevant, but it becomes irrelevant as soon as the real plot kicks off. So it's a way to introduce the characters and get readers to relate to the characters. But as soon as the inciting incident takes place, the pre-problem becomes completely irrelevant. So in the Jewels of Fate, the pre-problem is Chuck's relationship with his parents. It's a dysfunctional family. His parents are millionaires who don't give him the time of day. He's kind of off on his own. And yet they have this whole, life plan for him, and he's trying to fight against that. As soon as, monsters come into the picture, whether or not you're going to go to the right university kind of becomes irrelevant. And yet it's a way to hook people in right from the first chapter and push them to, I think the inciting incident is around chapter 5 or 6.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I like that, because it also makes the character very relatable, because most kids would probably, that would resonate with them. I was thinking Star Wars, Luke's problem at first is he wants to go and pick up power converters with his friends at Toshi Station and join the academy, and his uncle wants him to work on the farm, and then suddenly like, oh look, stormtroopers, and none of that matters. But it makes him very relatable, because you can relate to him as a farm boy. And I guess a lot of Americans could probably relate to having parents who are busy working all the time, don't give them the time of day.
Exactly.
And so where did that, as a character, like, where did that come in? Did your parents read The Jewel of Fate and be like, we're not like this, what are you doing, Tyler, are these us?
No, it's funny, because my parents like to pick out characters from the book and say, oh, this character sounds a lot like this person in real life. They kind of compare me to the main character Chuck, which I really don't see, but that's what they think. But no, they're not like Chuck's parents.
So you mentioned that you re-edited this book 5 times before you even published it as a teenager. Now I look back, I actually have, my parents gave it to me, a book that I wrote when I was 17, and it's practically unreadable. I was like flicking through it going, what is this crap? And then again, that shows an awful lot of like self-awareness, to be like, I have to revise this, I have to revise this again, I have to revise this again, especially as a teenager. What inspired that?
Just the desire that I want this to be published someday, and I want it to, stand with all of the other books that are on Amazon, or even, traditionally published books that are sitting on, a bookshelf in chapters. And, I had those moments too, where I was reading it and I'm like, no one's going to want to read this. Like, this is, crap. Like, it needs so much more work. But eventually, like, the more you work on it, the more it gets to the point where I realized, okay, I think it's ready for someone other than my mom to read it now.
Did you end up giving it to like beta readers, or did you just sort of bite the bullet and send it out there?
The first book, I didn't do beta readers, just because of my timeline. I was actually at the time in a kind of an entrepreneurship program where the government was giving you a grant to start your own business, and my business was publishing a novel. But in order to qualify for that grant, I had to get the book out by the end of the summer. So just for financial reasons and all of that, it just wasn't feasible to have beta readers at that point.
That's pretty cool.
Now that's an interesting thing as well. So that's why you decided to take the route of independent publishing. Because if you look up your book on the product page, it's like the publisher is Tyler Snure and Laurie Snure, which I think a lot of people do it independently or through Amazon. This all seems like you had an agenda right from the get-go. You were starting your own business, which is kind of interesting, because I guess that means you had right from the get-go, this is a product that I'm putting out to people, and therefore I wanted to be successful. And that's a slightly more pragmatic approach than I think a lot of self-published authors take. A lot of self-published authors are, I want to write this book, and then they're like, okay, now I can get people to buy it. It seems like you approach it from the other way, and it's like, I need to make a product that people will buy. So what inspired that whole approach? What inspired the idea of starting your own publishing company to do it?
Well, I was in high school at the time, and my entrepreneurship teacher told me I should enter this program. And at the time, I didn't connect the dots that being a self-published author also made you an entrepreneur and a business owner, until I applied for one of the 8 positions in this program. And they were like, yeah, we'd love to help you, with your book. Like, that's a great product. I'm like, I didn't realize that a book was a product. I always thought a book, was just a book. And then obviously with that program came a lot of, business related training, and they kind of teach you to see your product, no matter what it is, no matter what industry it's in, as a way to market it.
That's really, God, isn't it cool that you learn entrepreneurship at school? Like I learned like stupid stuff like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and stuff like that. And you're actually learning like practical things and how you can approach those. So when you discussed like starting your own publishing company, having a product and putting out there, what guidance did people give you about how to get started with that?
The biggest help I needed with was, the legal stuff. Like, how do you legally register a company, with your local government? So I'm in Canada, province of Ontario. So how do I register a publishing company with the province of Ontario? And it was surprisingly easy and surprisingly cheap to do so. Yeah, my business license didn't cost me much at all. And yeah, that was it. That's all it took to make it a verifiable company in the eyes of the government.
Awesome. So when I do your little caption up there, I'll go Tyler Snure, cheap and easy.
I'm in Ontario as well, and I think I have heard of that program, but I never really looked into it. So it's good to hear that is something that, people are taking advantage of, and like young people like you. That's awesome. And
taking it back. No, go on.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, taking it back to topic. When you're selling a product I don't know if we can talk about advertising and marketing in a bit, but when you land on your product page on Amazon, it's like a journey that you're leading whoever arrived there on, of like, oh, the cover is appropriate and your cover looks like it deserves to belong along young adult things. There's the blurb, then there are the reviews and things. But one of the things I think is very underrated in terms of turning traffic into customers is the look inside, where people read the first sections of a book. And I know this because in my first book in my series, I was advertising it. I had figured out my conversion rate, and then I rewrote the first chapter to make it much more compelling, and had a really a really scandalous first page, and it doubled the number of people who landed on my product page and actually bought my book. So I think that first page is so important. When did you become aware of that as like a major thing to focus on?
Definitely not till the end, which my advice for new authors is focus on it in the beginning. Make sure that you understand the importance of the first page and the first chapter in the beginning, because I didn't realize it until the end. And so my mom was the first person to read the book before it was published, and she was making these notes and saying like, oh, this doesn't make any sense, this is unclear, this doesn't sound right. And as an author, creating a book, it's like your baby, right? Like, you don't want anyone talking bad about it. So I was like, what do you mean it's unclear? Like, what do you mean it doesn't make any sense? And at first I was very resistant to changing it and updating it, because I just I thought it was good, I thought it was ready, and I wanted it out there. But I needed the reminder that if you're maybe not 100% confident, because you can fall into the trap of over revising and then never getting it published. But I'd say you want to be at least 85% confident in the book when it gets published. And I wasn't there yet. The more I looked at it, and the more I realized, oh, she's right, this line doesn't make sense, this paragraph doesn't make sense. And it was right in the beginning too, like right there on the first page. And that's what can make or break a book, if like a lot of readers put down the book within the first page. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it's true.
That's very true. I just wrote a blog post about Frida McFadden and her book. She was a self-published author. Her first book, The Housemaid, it has a killer first line. It's like, if I leave this house, it's going to be in handcuffs. And she went viral on Book Talk. But it's like that first line was one of the reasons why, people would see the blurb and it was a great blurb. They'd open that, read that first line, and it was like, boom, hooked. So again, that shows a lot of self-awareness. And I think, Craig, when you and I work with other authors, sometimes we give authors very pragmatic advice about things they need to change their book if they want to be commercially successful. And we do experience like resistance from people, because I understand, as you said, Tyler, it's like your book is your baby and you don't want to necessarily like shake the baby, but sometimes you do need to shake the baby to actually make it something that people want to buy. And that shows so much self-awareness from a young author, whereas a lot of us, me included, it took us a long time and a few hard knocks to finally get reality into us.
Yeah, and I think that your mother is a lot more honest than mine would be. Like, I think no matter what my book was, she would never tell me that there were any issues. She'd probably, oh, this is wonderful, it's perfect. I could never trust what she would say. Not that I would let her read any of my romance stuff, but but yeah, I mean, I like you said, books are a product, and that is something that we often have to sort of drill into authors' heads, like that. Like you said, running a business, you're self-publishing, you're doing everything. Even if you're not physically doing everything, you might hire people to create your cover, or to do this or to do that, but you're the one who has to hire them. You're the one who has to realize that you can't do it yourself, and so you have to go and you have to find a cover artist. You have to check what else they've done, make sure they're good for you. You have to pay them. You have to do all those things. You have to handle marketing. You have to understand all those facets. And the book, like you said, is a product. It is your product. And when you only have the first book, then it's your only product. You need to make sure people want to read it. And the cover, as we've always said, is one of those first things that will bring people to it. You always hear, don't judge a book by its cover, but people absolutely do. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, right? I mean, if you're walking in a bookstore and looking at rows and rows of books, what are you going to pick up? You're going to pick up the one that catches your eye. And it's the same thing on Amazon. You see all your pages of covers and the top lists and wherever you're browsing, and you see the cover. That's the first thing you see, unless you recognize the name of the author, and you have to be a big name to be recognizable. That's the first thing you see. So you click on that, and then you read the blurb, and that's sort of the second thing you see. But the next thing you're going to do is you're going to open that up, and you're going to say, okay, because not every book is sort of your kind of reading, your writing style that you like to read, right? So you'll open it up, and if that first thing does not capture I'd say you have maybe more than a first line, and if your first line can hook, like with Frida's and yours, that's even better. But you have maybe a paragraph or two, but if it's dry and boring, I don't think most people are going to get past that, right? Like, because why should they can just go on to the next one. So and then, like, to go back then, so we talked about foreshadowing and pre-problems and flashbacks. Do you have any other sort of ways that we can hook readers at that first part?
I know from a reading perspective, I love books that start in the middle of a scene. And what I talk about, whether I'm doing school visits or teaching a master class, it always seems to come up is never start a book or a chapter, or especially a book, with exposition, like this long background, kind of like you mentioned Star Wars earlier, kind of like at the beginning of Star Wars when all the text scrolls by and it's giving context to what the movie is going to be about. It might work in a Star Wars movie, but probably not, in a book, especially the first chapter. So I like, to get right into the meat of things. Maybe not a specific action scene, but something is happening. Like, it's not just, once upon a time there was this character, and this is what this character's childhood was like, and then 3 pages later, okay, this is where the character is now, this is where the story will start, kind of thing.
You do that very succinctly. It's like the first paragraph of your first page, there are like five different paragraphs, and they put everything about Chuck's situation in it, and then you just throw it straight into him in the kitchen with Gail, which I think is great. Because you're right. When I think in 1977, maybe people had lesser expectations, and the scrolling thing in Star Wars was new and innovative. But now, if I watch a Marvel movie like the Eternals, and it starts off with 3,000 years ago, the sword of Diogenes was created by the 9 gods of whatever, and it's like boring. I don't want this. I want something. I want to jump straight into the action.
Yeah.
So in terms of killer first lines, what are some of the favorite first lines you have from books that inspired you? I think it's a good question for everyone. I mean, I like James Bond. So the first line of Casino Royale is the smoke and scent of a casino at 3 a.m. in the morning is nauseating. That's a great line, more so in the 60s when people had less demands. But what are the first lines of books that have really inspired you and grabbed you, and you wanted yours to be as impactful as?
One of my favorites is, I have two favorites. The first is the Percy Jackson series.
Yeah.
I don't remember it word for word, but the Lightning Thief starts off with, I didn't know I was going to be a half-blood. I'm pretty sure that's what the line is. And like right away hooked me in. It tells you, you're thinking, what's a half-blood? Like, who is this character? Why didn't he know that he was going to be a half-blood? And then it just, keeps going from there. And then my second is the Gone series. And in the Gone series, the first line in the first book is, 1 minute my teacher was there, and the next minute she was gone. Actually, so it's 2 lines. But the whole point of it is the whole series is about all the adults suddenly disappear, and the kids are left to run this small town in California. And it's a lot like Lord of the Flies, but updated for modern times. And it's an amazing series. And right away, like we were just talking about, getting going right in the middle of the story, like the teacher disappears, all the adults disappear, and in the first page, the kids are left with just each other, right? And they're running things now.
That is great. That's a great concept. I think, again, when you're talking about your book as a product, having a killer concept is really, really important. And it's the Percy Jackson. A lot of people compare your books to Percy Jackson because I guess there are some similarities. I don't think they're derivative in any way, but your books are set in New York, and Percy Jackson, of course, famously set in New York.
Yes.
How much was there emulation there, or did you just happen to just dig that kind of thing? Why did you set up? You're from Ontario. Why did you set your book in New York?
I love New York, which is ironic because I've never been there. Yes, I was supposed to go for my grade 12 grad trip. We were supposed to go to New York, and then COVID canceled that. So I was super disappointed. So I just did a post about how I use Google Maps to help me like describe New York, and and the whole book isn't set in New York. It's only the first few chapters, but obviously I need to know what the city was like. But I think New York is fascinating because there's so many people, there's so many different suburbs. Like you've got Manhattan, you've got Chinatown, Rhode Island, like there's all these different areas of New York. And I find like when I watch movies like Elf is set in New York. I think the visuals of just how the city looks is just so cool, with the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty and all kinds of stuff.
That's where I live, and it's like your book did conjure that stuff.
Yeah, and it's something that I don't know, maybe I don't know, it's probably not just me, but I feel like as a Canadian, often, you're writing for a market that's usually US based because that's the biggest market. And I feel that I don't want to, be a person that is not like proud of where they live. It's not that, but it's like, I think that my books would appeal to readers more if they were set in a big US city than be like, hey, I'm in Ontario, anyone in the US pick that up and be like,
I get that. Like imagine Sex in the City, except instead of New York City, it's set in like Winnipeg.
Yeah, it's just not, so I get it. And I like, the idea of being able to use Google Maps, especially because you can use Street View. You can like almost walk down those streets. You can, it's not like, 20 years ago or 30 years ago where you couldn't really accurately describe a city without having been there. But these days, if you want to, you could talk about a suburb with specifics because you could just Google Maps, Street View, and just walk down the street and you could refer to different stores that are there and whatever, right? Which, might date the book, but I think, that's made that sort of thing more accessible now too. So one of the lines that I recall from a book that stuck with me, it was read it to my kids, but Lemony Snicket, the series of unfortunate events, and it had started with something like, if you're looking for a book with a happy ending, this is not the story for you, or something like that. And I like that, it's sort of like, because so many books are, they're going to end up all nice and happy and stuff, and that kind of often ruins some of the tension, right? Because everything's going to work out in the end. So to me, that I like that it started out with that, because it's like, okay, so then you never know what's going to happen then.
I love that series. That's a great series.
It really is. That's a series that like we got all the books, and it was so beautiful because that was a very evocative series. And when they made the movie and the TV shows, it was, again, it like conjured up this almost retro futuristic thing of a time that didn't really exist.
Yeah. And I think that that's sort of maybe another technique, is like saying something at the beginning that is almost like it's almost fantastical, or something that you can't really believe is going to happen, or that really like makes you think, what? I've got to read and know what this is all about, which, you know, in your line it's sort of like that as well. You gotta say at the end of the world, like, you know what, you gotta figure that out. It's like, so you can have like a killer hook, but like, so in the Frida book, where it's like, well, you take me out in handcuffs, it's not really, it's enticing, right? You want to find out why, but it's not something that sort of like blows your mind, like you gotta what, how, you know, and like, this isn't going to be a happy ending, what, I got, you know. So you want to kind of that's just, I guess, another way to sort of start the book, is if your book sort of like, you know, you can't really shoehorn that in a romance. I guess you're not going to be like talking about the end of the world, and you certainly aren't going to not have a happily ever after ending, because that's what romance readers want, right? So obviously it depends on your genre, but sometimes you really want to twist the expectation of the reader right from the get-go, because that really, really makes them want to read, I think.
I think that works especially well in YA as well. I was just thinking, you mentioned the first line of The Lightning Thief, and isn't like the second line about, if you're reading this book, my advice is close it right now, because believe all the lies that your mum and dad told you, but the world is a scary place, kind of thing. And it follows very closely to Lemony Snicket. And I think teens and young adults especially like that, because you're reaching that stage in your life where the wonderful rosy vision of the world that your mum and dad have given you, you suddenly see that actually the real world is a big scary place, and you know, mum and dad don't have the answers for everything, and you're going to be on your own sooner or later. And that's part of what makes books like yours and books like The Lightning Thief and Star Wars and things, they all follow Joseph Campbell's like the hero's journey of throwing you into a big, scary, unfamiliar world in which you have no one to rely on apart from yourself.
Exactly.
So tell us about this masterclass that you teach on this subject. So what is that? Like, where would people like find that, and what is it that you do? Is this an online thing, or is this you know, something that you teach in a class setting, or what is it?
So I teach it online. It's a virtual masterclass, roughly 45 minutes to an hour, called the Chapter 1 Challenge Session. And we go into more detail about pretty much everything we've talked about on this podcast, about how to start a story right, you know, what readers are looking for, also what literary agents are looking for as well, if you do want to go traditional, because they, in some cases, literary agents and readers have the same expectations when it comes to reading your novel, but literary agents, it's slightly different, because they're thinking about your book from a more marketable standpoint, like, you know, will this make my publishing company money? That's how they're thinking about it. So we go into, you know, how to start a story, and we talk about the pre-problem. We talk a bit more about those 8 steps, the reader's roadmap, as I like to call it, from the decision to buy a book to leaving the store, or adding it to your shopping cart. Yeah, all kinds of stuff related to that. And if you would like to find out more about that, I always send out an invitation whenever I'm hosting it to my email. So if you want to get on my mailing list, and with a bunch of other freebies and cool offers there too, all that is on my website.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So it's not a pre-recorded thing, right? It's a live session that you.
It's a live, because I like to answer questions after too. And a lot of participants sometimes have, you know, clarifying questions or things like that.
Now, is that part of your publishing business? Is this like, you know, you write books, you publish books? Is this part of that entrepreneurial journey you're on?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. That's what I'm moving towards, and slowly building up. Yes.
And then, so how do you get people to know about this class? Like, how do you advertise it?
Many different ways. So like I said, I send out more of a formal invitation through my email, because it has, a sign up link and all of that. So it's easy to kind of access, and for, participants to sign up. And then that way I can also kind of see from my end who's signing up. But I talk about it if I'm if I'm speaking at an event or a conference, author visits in schools, podcasts like this, kind of any way I can, meet new people and talk to new people. I like to address it and talk about it.
But how did you get those people onto your list in the first place? I mean, I imagine that if they're on there, they probably already took it, or they're readers of your book, in which case they might not be interested in, how to write the book. So, where, you said the formal invitation, but how do they get on there without having already taken the class?
Absolutely. So it's most of my email list before, because I've only been running this class, this year in 2023. So prior to that, it was, people who bought the book, read the book. I did a lot of local vendor markets in my area. So people kind of, joined my newsletter that way as well. So I'd say maybe 75%, 25%, 75% being they signed up, because of the book and they want to, read the book. And then 25%, they found me through, hey, I want to join this masterclass. And then by that way, joins the newsletter.
And is there a cost for the class, or is it
free? It's free.
Wow, that's really great.
How many
people do you usually get in a session, and how often do you run them?
I run them every couple of months or so, and it varies between, like, not too many. I'd say I get, up to, 10 registrations.
And that's nice, because that keeps it kind of intimate. I think when you're teaching a class like that, because everyone comes in with not just themselves, but also their 70,000 word, 100,000 word book that they want to improve. So that's a lot of stuff coming in. So I think more than 10 people, it might get a bit unwieldy.
Exactly. Yes.
And you said it's about 45 minutes. Do the people sort of, do you break it out into sort of breakout sessions, or is it just sort of you talking and then have a Q&A at the end?
It's mostly me talking, and then I do a Q&A at the end, but I also really like to make my presentations interactive. And this is not just for the masterclass, but, whenever I'm speaking at a conference, or whether I'm in a school, especially because, kids, their attention span is not that long at all.
Well, adults are getting the same way.
So yeah, I like to make it super interactive. I like to ask questions, kind of get them to talk. I always get them to share about what book they're working on, and especially, where they could use some guidance the most.
That's great. And well, we're actually approaching the top of the hour, but I was going to say, this is an excellent time. So when people hear this and they become interested in it, where can they find out more? You just said your website. Where is your website? Yes.
So my website is www.snurestories.com. So like my name, SNURE, Snure, and then stories, STORIES. You can follow me on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or X now. Same handle, Snure Stories.
Good branding. There we go. And I think that's been fascinating. So Craig, as we wrap up, do you have any last thoughts or questions?
I will end with this. When talking about, the start of the story, I feel like, as both a reader and a writer, I feel like it's not your job. It's not the author's job to get a reader to like the book. It's the author's job to get the reader not to put the book down. Because there are a lot of times readers can read through the whole book and they might hate the book, never want to read it again, but they might know exactly the next person to give the book to. Like, you will love this. You should read this, not for me, but here, have it.
I hated this book. You'll love it.
Yeah.
You'll never get that chance if they don't finish it, or if they stop at the first page.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes where you can tell a book's not for you, but if the story is compelling, you still want to see how it ends, right? And that's a good point. Like if you can still get them to do that, they might at the end be able to say, hey, you know, this wasn't for me for whatever reason, but it can be for you. And so that, you know, that's a good point. You know, listen, thanks for coming on. I think that this is something that is so super important, and I can understand why you give a class, and I think it's awesome that you're doing it for all these the classes that you speak to the students and stuff, because if you're a beginning writer, you really need to understand the whole idea that you are selling a product, and to sell a product, that product has to be compelling. It has to, people have to want to buy it, you know, and they're not going to just do it because you wrote it. It's got to have all those things, the, you know, the packaging and everything. And then when they look inside, they, you know, they have to be, oh yeah, this is something I need. So this is a really, really great topic. So thank you again for coming on and bringing it up with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we will pop the link to your website down below. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, and if you have valued what Tyler came to share with us today, make sure you scroll down there and leave him a comment in that comment section. While you're down there, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. There is a little bell there that you can click to get notified every time we have a new episode of Fully Booked. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So until then, stay tuned. Thank you very much.